Sarah Matthews stared at her reflection in the courthouse bathroom mirror, barely recognizing the woman who stared back. At 32, she had already achieved what many considered the pinnacle of success: senior partner at one of Manhattan's top law firms, a brownstone in the Upper East Side, and until today, what she thought was a perfect marriage. The irony wasn't lost on her that as a corporate lawyer who had orchestrated countless mergers and acquisitions, she had failed to see the dissolution of her own marriage coming. The bathroom's harsh fluorescent lighting highlighted the dark circles under her eyes, remnants of countless sleepless nights since discovering the truth 3 months ago. The scene played in her mind like a bad movie walking into her best friend Rachel's apartment unannounced, armed with soup and medicine after hearing she was too sick to attend their weekly dinner. Instead of finding Rachel in bed with the flu, she found her in bed with James, Sarah's husband of 8 years. "All rise," the bailiff's voice had echoed through the courtroom just an hour ago. Sarah had stood, her Louboutin heels firmly planted on the ground, her spine straight as steel. James sat on the other side of the courtroom, his lawyer whispering something in his ear. He had the audacity to wear the Tom Ford suit she had bought him for their last anniversary. In the matter of Matthews versus Matthews, this court grants the petition for divorce on the grounds of adultery. Judge Henderson had declared, her gavel striking with a finality that should have brought relief. Instead, Sarah felt hollow. Now, as the late afternoon sun filtered through the courthouse windows, Sarah pulled her Hermes scarf tighter around her neck, another gift from James, one she couldn't bring herself to throw away yet. Her heels clicked against the marble floors as she made her way down the courthouse steps, ignoring the sympathetic glances from colleagues who had witnessed her meteoric rise in the legal world, and now watched her personal life crumble. The crisp October air hit her face as she emerged onto Center Street. Usually she would head straight to the office, bury herself in work until the cleaning staff politely reminded her it was past midnight. But not today. Today, the sight of her office building looming in the distance made her stomach turn. Instead, she turned toward Lafayette Street, where she knew the Maltons bar would be opening for happy hour. Just one drink, she promised herself, knowing full well it was a lie. Today, Sarah Matthews, the woman who had never lost a case, who color-coded her calendar months in advance, who had a 5-year plan before she could walk, would get spectacularly drunk. And for once, she didn't care about the consequences. As she pushed open the heavy wooden doors of the Malton, the warm glow of Art Deco chandeliers welcomed her into its embrace. The bartender, an older gentleman with kind eyes, looked up from polishing glasses. "Rough day?" he asked, though the question seemed rhetorical. Sarah slipped onto a leather bar stool, placed her Prada bag beside her, and managed a weak smile. "You could say that. Bourbon neat. Make it a double." Consciousness returned to Sarah in waves, each one bringing with it a new sensation of discomfort. First came the throbbing headache, pulsing behind her eyes with the intensity of a jackhammer. Then the cottony dryness in her mouth, followed by the nauseating realization that she had no idea where she was. She forced her eyes open, immediately regretting it as sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of Central Park. This wasn't her bedroom. This wasn't her bedroom. This wasn't anyone's bedroom she recognized. The king-sized bed she lay in was dressed in what felt like thousand-thread-count Egyptian cotton sheets, their pristine white color making her wince. "Oh God," she groaned, slowly pushing herself up to sitting position. Her black Armani dress from yesterday was still on, though decidedly wrinkled. Her shoes, thank heaven for small mercies, had been placed neatly by a modern leather chaise lounge. The room itself was a study in understated luxury. Abstract paintings that looked like original Rothkos adorned walls in a shade of grey that probably had some pretentious name like Manhattan Mist. A floating staircase of glass and steel spiraled up to what appeared to be a second level, and through an open door, she glimpsed a marble bathroom bigger than her first apartment. "Good morning," a deep voice called from somewhere beyond the bedroom door, followed by the smell of coffee, expensive coffee, the kind that probably cost more per pound than her weekly grocery budget. Sarah's heart jumped into her throat. She scrambled for her phone, finding it plugged into a charging station on the nightstand. 9:47 a.m. 17 missed calls, mostly from her assistant. No obvious signs of foul play, but that did little to calm her racing pulse. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice hoarse. Her purse sat untouched on a nearby console table, wallet still visible inside. A man appeared in the doorway, holding 2 mugs of coffee. He looked to be in his late 30s, with the kind of face that belonged on the cover of Forbes' strong jawline, intelligent grey eyes, and dark hair touched with silver at the temples. He wore casual clothes that probably cost more than her monthly mortgage payment, a black cashmere sweater and tailored pants. "Alexander Drake," he said, staying in the doorway as if conscious of making her uncomfortable. "And before you panic, I promise there's a reasonable explanation for all this." Sarah's foggy brain finally clicked. Alexander Drake, founder of Drake Technologies, the AI company that had revolutionized medical diagnosis. Recently valued at $48 billion. Known for his philanthropy almost as much as his innovation. "I'm in Alexander Drake's penthouse," she said flatly, more to herself than him. "Why am I in Alexander Drake's penthouse?" He approached slowly, offering her one of the coffee mugs. "Because you needed help last night, and I was in a position to offer it. You were quite adamant about not wanting to go home." Fragments of memory started returning, bourbon burning her throat, tears she couldn't hold back, the sympathetic bartender cutting her off, her credit card declining when she tried to call a car service she'd forgotten. She'd frozen all her joint accounts with James. "You were at the Marlton," she said, accepting the coffee with shaking hands. "I often stop there after board meetings. It's quiet, discreet." He settled into the chaise lounge, maintaining a respectful distance. "When I saw you crying at the bar, I was going to mind my own business. But then you started giving what was possibly the most impressive drunk lecture on corporate law I've ever heard, followed by a scathing critique of modern marriage as an institution." Sarah closed her eyes, mortification washing over her. "Please tell me I didn't." "You did. And when you nearly fell trying to leave, I couldn't just let you wander off alone. My driver brought us here, and my housekeeper helped get you settled in the guest room. I stayed in the master suite upstairs." "That's surprisingly decent of you," Sarah said cautiously. Taking a sip of the coffee, it was exactly how she liked it, which was either a lucky guess or evidence that she'd been coherent enough last night to specify her coffee preferences to someone. Alexander's lips quirked into a half smile. "Don't sound so surprised. Some of us billionaires actually try to be decent human beings. Let me help you," Alexander said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. They'd moved to his terrace, Manhattan sprawling beneath them like a glittering tapestry. The morning sun had burned away the awkwardness of their unusual meeting, replaced by an unexpected ease. Sarah cradled her 3rd cup of coffee, studying him over the rim. "Help me, Mr. Drake." "Alexander," he corrected. "Alexander," she amended. "I appreciate the rescue last night, but I'm not a charity case. I'm still one of the top corporate lawyers in the city." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "And I'm not offering charity, I'm offering an opportunity. Drake Technologies is expanding our legal department, particularly our foundation branch. We need someone with both corporate expertise and personal insight into how life can blindside you." The words hit closer to home than she expected. Sarah's mind drifted to the moment she first suspected something was wrong in her marriage. It hadn't been anything dramatic, just James coming home late one night, smelling of Rachel's signature perfume. She'd dismissed it then, buried herself in case files instead of asking questions. "You speak from experience," she observed, noting the shadow that crossed his face. Alexander's fingers drummed against his armrest. 5 years ago, I was engaged to my company's CFO, Charlotte. We'd built Drake Technologies together from a startup in my garage to a Fortune 500 company. He paused, a bitter smile playing at his lips. Then I discovered she'd been selling company secrets to our competitors for years. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it nearly destroyed everything I'd built. Sarah felt a familiar ache in her chest. "How did you handle it?" "Poorly at first," he admitted. "I threw myself into work, stopped trusting anyone. But eventually I realized that letting her betrayal define me meant she won twice." He gestured at the city below. "So I redirected that energy. Created the Drake Foundation, focused on helping people rebuild their lives after personal setbacks." The parallel wasn't lost on Sarah. Her mind wandered to the last normal moment of her marriage, a Sunday morning 3 months ago, making pancakes in their kitchen. James had kissed her cheek, said he was meeting clients for brunch. She'd found his wedding ring in the sink later, forgotten in his rush to meet Rachel. "I used to think I was good at reading people," she said softly. 8 years of marriage, and I never saw it coming. Rachel was my best friend since law school. She helped me pick out my wedding dress, for God's sake. The memory stung fresh like salt in a wound that refused to heal. Alexander's voice was gentle. The people closest to us have the most power to hurt us because we give them our blind spots. It's not a failure of judgment, it's a consequence of trust. Is that why you haven't remarried? Sarah asked, then immediately regretted her forwardness. I'm sorry, that's none of my business. But Alexander didn't seem offended. No, it's a fair question. And you're right, I've had relationships since Charlotte, but I've kept them casual, controlled. Saifi looked at her intently. Until recently I thought that was enough. The weight of his gaze made Sarah's heart skip a beat, and she quickly redirected. So tell me about this foundation position. They spent the next hour discussing the role leading the legal team for the Drake Foundation's newest initiative, providing resources and support for people rebuilding their lives after personal crises. The salary he mentioned made her eyebrows rise, but it was the purpose behind it that resonated. We all have scars, Alexander said, walking her to his private elevator later that morning. The trick is finding people whose scars align with our own. Sarah thought about her empty brownstone, the pitying looks from colleagues, the social circle she'd lost in the divorce. And if our scars are still bleeding? Alexander reached out, hesitated, then gently squeezed her shoulder. Then maybe we help each other stop the bleeding first. As the elevator doors closed between them, Sarah felt something she hadn't expected: hope. Not the desperate kind that had sustained her through the divorce proceedings, but something steadier, more substantial. In Alexander's presence, her pain felt less like a weakness and more like a qualification for something greater. Her phone buzzed a text from James. Heard you didn't show up for work today. Hope you're not falling apart without me. 6 months ago, that message would have devastated her. Now, looking at her reflection in the elevator's mirrored walls, she saw something different. Not a victim, not a failed wife, but a woman on the verge of transformation. She typed a reply, actually, I'm exactly where I need to be. Then she deleted it, choosing instead to let his message go unanswered. Some conversations weren't worth having anymore. The elevator opened to the lobby, where Alexander's driver waited to take her home. As she stepped into the morning sunshine, Sarah realized that for the first time since discovering James's betrayal, she was thinking about the future instead of the past. And surprisingly, that future looked a lot like the view from Alexander Drake's terrace, full of possibility, touched by light, and somehow both terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. Sarah's resignation letter sat in the outbox of her work email, unsigned. After 2 weeks of daily coffee meetings with Alexander, strictly professional, she kept telling herself the job offer at the Drake Foundation had evolved from a possibility into a contract waiting for her signature. The compensation package was staggering, but it was the purpose behind the work that kept drawing her back to the idea. Her cursor hovered over the send button when her office door burst open. James stormed in, waving his phone with page 6 displayed on the screen. The headline made her stomach drop: Tech Billionaire's New Romance. Drake spotted with recently divorced power lawyer. Are you sleeping with him? James demanded, his face flushed. Is that how you got the offer? Sarah felt a familiar surge of anger, but this time it was different, controlled, almost cold. You lost the right to ask about my personal life when you decided to sleep with my best friend, she replied, her voice steady. But since you're so concerned, no, I'm not sleeping with Alexander Drake. He's offering me a chance to help people who've been betrayed by those they trusted most. Ironic, isn't it? The photo in the article was innocent enough: Alexander and Sarah leaving their regular coffee spot, both laughing at something. But the way he looked at her in the image made her breath catch. She hadn't noticed it in the moment, but the camera had captured something raw and genuine in his expression. Her phone buzzed with a text from Rachel: moving on to Billionaire'S now? Guess I did you a favor. Sarah blocked both their numbers. That evening, in Alexander's office overlooking the city, she finally signed the contract. You know this will fuel the rumors, she said, watching him file away the papers. Does that bother you? He asked, his grey eyes searching her face. It should, she admitted. My whole life I've fought to be taken seriously, to prove my success came from merit, not connections or compromise. This feels like taking the easy way out, Alexander finished, moving to stand beside her at the window. Sarah, I've watched you spend the last 2 weeks revolutionizing our foundation's entire legal approach. You identified 3 major liability issues we hadn't considered and developed a framework for expanding our support services internationally. If anything, I'm getting the better end of this deal. The sincerity in his voice made her heart race. They stood close enough that she could smell his cologne, something subtle and expensive, like everything else about him. But it wasn't his wealth that drew her in, it was the way he saw her, really saw her, even when she was at her lowest. There's something else you should know, he said softly. The board is concerned about the appearance of impropriety. They've suggested that any personal relationship between us could compromise the foundation's reputation. Sarah's heart sank. Oh, I understand. We should keep things strictly professional then. Alexander turned to face her fully. Actually, I told them I couldn't promise that. What? I told them that while I can guarantee our professional relationship will remain ethical and transparent, I won't pretend I'm not falling in love with you. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. Sarah felt dizzy, like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Every logical part of her brain screamed that this was too fast, too complicated, too risky. But her heart, her battered, healing heart, recognized something in Alexander that felt like coming home. The press will have a field day, she whispered, not moving away when he took her hand. Let them, he replied. Some things are worth the headlines. The encrypted email arrived at 3 a.m., its contents making Sarah's blood run cold. Financial records, board meeting minutes, and internal memos all pointing to a carefully orchestrated plan to oust Alexander from his own company. The source was anonymous, but the data was legitimate. Someone on the board wanted her to find this. Mrs. Matthews, her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. Mr. Whitman from the board is here to see you. Sarah quickly closed the files. Robert Whitman, head of the board's finance committee, strode into her office with the confidence of someone holding all the cards. Burning the midnight oil, Sarah? Always the dedicated one. Just reviewing some foundation proposals, she lied smoothly. What can I do for you, Robert? He settled into the chair across from her desk, adjusting his Rolex. Actually, it's what I can do for you. The board has been impressed with your work these past 3 months. We're considering creating a new position, Chief Legal Officer, for the entire Drake Technologies Group, not just the foundation. Sarah's pulse quickened. It was the kind of offer that could define a career, the very position she'd dreamed of before her divorce had derailed everything. That's quite an opportunity. Indeed, Whitman's smile didn't reach his eyes. Of course, such a position requires absolute loyalty to the board and discretion about certain irregularities you might have discovered. The pieces clicked into place. The leaked documents weren't a warning, they were a test. You're planning to vote Alexander out at the next shareholders' meeting, she said flatly. Alexander is a visionary, but his recent focus on charity over profits is concerning our major investors. The foundation is hemorrhaging money that could be better spent on R&D. Surely you understand it's just business. Like what Charlotte did was just business. Sarah watched satisfaction flicker across Whitman's face. Ah, so he told you about that. Did he mention that she came to us first? That we encouraged her actions because Alexander's idealism was threatening our market position even then? Sarah felt sick. You orchestrated his fiancée's betrayal. We did what was necessary, just like we're doing now. Whitman stood, straightening his tie. The board meets in 2 days. Think about your future, Sarah. Don't let misplaced loyalty or worse, emotions cloud your judgment. You've already had one failed relationship cost you everything. Don't make the same mistake twice. After he left, Sarah sat in her darkening office, the weight of the decision crushing her chest. The evidence in her possession could destroy the board's plan, but using it would mean exposing years of corporate manipulation. Drake Technologies' stock would plummet. Thousands of employees would be affected. The foundation's work would grind to a halt. Her phone lit up with a text from Alexander. Dinner tonight. I miss you. 3 simple words that made her decision infinitely harder. Their relationship had blossomed over the past months, careful and tender, both of them learning to trust again. She'd fallen in love with his passion for helping others, his quiet strength, the way he looked at her like she was something precious rather than something broken. In her mind, she heard James's mocking voice, hope you're not falling apart without me. She'd proved him wrong, rebuilt herself stronger. But now, facing another betrayal, this time from the other side, she wondered if she was strong enough to survive losing everything again. The confrontation couldn't wait. She found Alexander in his penthouse office, silhouetted against the night sky. Without preamble, she laid out everything: the documents, Whitman's offer, the board's long-running manipulation. "They want me to keep quiet," she finished, her voice hoarse. "To choose career advancement over us." Alexander stood perfectly still, his face unreadable. "And what have you decided?" "That's not fair," she whispered. "You can't ask me that." "I think I have to." He turned to face her, pain evident in his eyes. "Because right now I'm looking at the woman I love holding evidence that could destroy everything I've built, and I need to know if history is repeating itself." The comparison to Charlotte struck her like a physical blow. "How dare you? I came to you the moment I found out." "Did you? Or did you wait until after Whitman made his offer?" "I can't believe you're questioning my loyalty when your own board has been undermining you for years." Sarah's voice cracked. "God, I was so stupid. I thought I could trust again, thought you were different." Sarah Alexander reached for her, but she stepped back. "No, you don't get to doubt me and then try to comfort me. I have spent my entire professional life making the smart choice, the practical choice, choosing career over passion, security over happiness. Then you came along and made me believe I could have both." She pulled out the contract for the Keogh position, the one Whitman had left on her desk. With trembling hands, she tore it in half. "What are you doing?" "Making a choice," she said, gathering the evidence files. "Maybe it's not the smart one, maybe it'll cost me everything again. But I'd rather lose my career than watch someone else I love be betrayed." She headed for the door, then paused. "The question is, Alexander, do you trust me enough to help me fight them? Or are you going to let your past with Charlotte poison our future too?" The next 48 hours passed in a blur of strategy sessions, legal documents, and too much coffee. Sarah and Alexander worked side by side in his penthouse office, their personal tension temporarily set aside for the greater battle ahead. She'd made copies of every incriminating document, created a timeline of the board's manipulation stretching back to Charlotte's betrayal, and prepared a presentation that would leave no doubt about the corruption at the heart of Drake Technologies. "The shareholders' meeting starts in an hour," Sarah said, adjusting her suit jacket. Her hands shook slightly as she gathered the files. "Are you ready?" Alexander looked up from his laptop, exhaustion and determination warring in his expression. "Thanks to you, I am." He stood, crossing the room to stand before her. "Sarah, about what I said before." She held up a hand. "Not now. We need to focus." The meeting room was packed with shareholders, board members, and press. News of potential corporate drama had leaked, though no one knew exactly what was coming. Whitman sat at the head of the board table, smugness radiating from every pore. Until Sarah walked in beside Alexander, manila envelopes in hand. "Before we begin the vote," Sarah announced, her voice clear and strong, "I'd like to present evidence of long-term corporate manipulation and fraud by certain board members." What followed was the most satisfying hour of her legal career. With surgical precision, she laid out the board's years of sabotage, including their role in Charlotte's industrial espionage. Whitman's face grew increasingly pale as she produced email after email, memo after memo, all pointing to a conspiracy that had nearly destroyed both the company and its founder. "This isn't just about profit versus philanthropy," Sarah concluded, facing the shareholders directly. "This is about the soul of Drake Technologies. Alexander Drake built this company to change lives, not just make money. The foundation isn't hemorrhaging funds, it's investing in humanity. And if that doesn't align with your values, perhaps you should reconsider your investment." The vote that followed wasn't even close. Whitman and his conspirators were removed from the board, pending criminal investigation. As reporters swarmed the building, Sarah slipped away to the rooftop garden where she and Alexander had shared so many conversations. He found her there, watching the sunset paint the city gold. "That was incredible," he said softly. "You were incredible." "I just did what was right." No, Alexander moved closer, his presence warming her even in the cool evening air. "You did more than that. You chose truth over advancement, integrity over opportunity. You chose to trust when every logical reason said not to." He took her hand, turning her to face him. "I'm sorry I doubted you, even for a moment." Charlotte's betrayal left scars I thought had healed, but clearly we both have some healing left to do, Sarah finished, squeezing his hand. But maybe that's okay. Maybe perfect isn't as important as real. Alexander lifted her chin gently. When did you get so wise? Somewhere between my divorce and falling in love with a billionaire with trust issues, she smiled, then grew serious. I meant what I said down there. About changing lives. The Foundation's work matters, Alexander. It mattered to me when I was at my lowest, even before I knew I'd be part of it. Speaking of which, he pulled out an envelope. The new board approved this unanimously 10 minutes ago. Co-director of the Drake Foundation, with complete autonomy over the legal and philanthropic divisions. Sarah stared at the offer. Alexander. It's not because I love you, he said quickly. It's because you're brilliant, passionate, and exactly what this company needs. The fact that I love you is just a very fortunate bonus. The city lights began twinkling on below them as Sarah looked from the envelope to the man holding it. 6 months ago, she'd been a broken woman drinking alone in a bar. Now, she stood on a rooftop with rebuilt confidence, renewed purpose, and a love she never saw coming. Well, she said, taking the envelope, I suppose this makes us partners in every sense of the word. 1 year later. Sarah stood in front of the Malton, the place where her life had changed so dramatically 12 months ago. The autumn air carried the same crisp promise of change, but this time she wasn't drowning in sorrow, she was celebrating triumph. Ready Alexander appeared beside her, lacing his fingers through hers. Inside, the bar had been transformed for the launch party of the Drake Foundation's newest initiative, the Phoenix Program, specifically designed to help divorce survivors rebuild their lives. The irony of the location wasn't lost on anyone who knew their story. Mess. Matthews, a young woman, approached, clutching a folder. Your story inspired me to leave my abusive marriage and apply for the Phoenix Program's legal aid scholarship. I start law school next semester. Sarah hugged her, remembering her own dark days. Call me Sarah. And remember, this is just the beginning of your story, not the end. The event was packed with journalists, beneficiaries, and supporters. On a screen behind the bar, photos cycled through the Foundation's achievements, new housing initiatives for displaced spouses, career retraining programs, counseling services. Each image represented a life transformed, a future reclaimed. James and Rachel had sent a joint email when the program was announced, calling it a publicity stunt. Sarah had archived it without responding. Some bridges weren't worth rebuilding. Later, as the party wound down, Alexander led her to their usual spot on his terrace. The city sparkled below them, but he seemed nervous, fidgeting with something in his pocket. Sarah, he began, a year ago, you stumbled into my life, gave a passionate dissertation on corporate law while incredibly drunk, and proceeded to turn my world upside down in the best possible way. She laughed, remembering that night. Not my finest moment. I disagree, he took her hands in his. It was the moment I started believing in second chances again. You showed me that sometimes the worst endings lead to the best beginnings. That trust isn't just about avoiding betrayal, it's about being brave enough to risk your heart again. Sarah's breath caught as he dropped to one knee, producing a ring that managed to be both elegant and understated, just like their love. I'm not just asking you to be my wife, he continued, his voice thick with emotion. I'm asking you to continue being my partner in everything, in business, in philanthropy, in life. To keep building something meaningful together, to keep helping others find their way back from rock bottom, just like we did. Tears blurred her vision as she looked at the man before her, not the billionaire tech mogul the world saw, but the compassionate soul who had seen her at her worst and loved her anyway. Yes, she whispered. To all of it. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Sarah thought about that broken woman who'd walked into the Malton a year ago, thinking her life was over. If only she could have seen this moment, seen how the end of her marriage wasn't a failure, but a redirect toward something truer. I have a surprise too, she said, pulling out a small envelope. The first quarter numbers for the Phoenix program. We've already helped 300 people start over, Alexander. 300 stories of hope. He pulled her close, and together they looked out over the city that had witnessed their transformation. Below them, Manhattan pulsed with endless possibilities, with thousands of stories yet to be rewritten. You know, Sarah mused, everyone keeps calling what we do helping people start over, but that's not quite right. We're helping them continue their stories, just with better chapters ahead. Alexander kissed her temple. Speaking of better chapters, how do you feel about a spring wedding? Sarah turned in his arms, remembering all the moments that had led to this one, the pain, the growth, the unexpected joy of finding love in the aftermath of heartbreak. I think spring sounds perfect. After all, that's when everything blooms again,